Do games like Grand Theft Auto 5 cause real-world violence? By Eric Kane. Two events happened this week that many politicians and members of the media will link together. The first, a mass shooting in Washington, D.C., in which an angry, mentally ill young man shot and killed a dozen of his fellow citizens. Second, the release of Grand Theft Auto 5, the perennial controversial sandbox game. The shootings already sparked calls for censorship of video games, with members of the media claiming both that there must be a causal connection and that not enough research has been done on the violent side effects of video games. I would dispute both of these claims. According to Media Matters, NBC's Mika Brzezinski of the Morning Joe show said that it's kind of hard not to make the connection between games and the Navy Yard shooting. When you hear the shooter's friends say that he would watch on a life-size screen these violent video games for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. The Telegraph's Nick Allen described the shooter's dark side, which saw him playing violent zombie video games in his room, sometimes from 12:30 p.m. until 4 a.m. It's odd to describe a mass murderer's dark side not as killings or other unstable interactions with people, but as an activity he shares with millions of other people. Quoth, Fox, and friends, Steve Ducey. Unfortunately, it seems every time something bad like this happens, we look at, is there a connection between video games and the shooter? Well, take a look at some people who were described as addicted from Columbine High School: Eric Harris, HRS, 0%, and Dylan Klebold, the Virginia Tech shooter; the Arizona shooter, Jared Lee Loughner; the Norway shooter, who's on Anders Bering, sick. I thought he shot 77 people; the Aurora shooter, James Holmes; the Sandy Hook shooter, Adam Lanza. They're all described essentially being addicted to video games. His co-host Elizabeth Hasselbeck asked, is there a link between a certain age group or demo in this? 20 to 34-year-old men, perhaps, that are playing video games and then their violent actions. We have yet to find out. In fact, numerous studies have been conducted on the results are mixed. Some studies have shown that video games increase aggression. Others show the opposite. No study has ever shown that violent video games result directly in actual violence, let alone mass shootings. That doesn't mean it isn't possible, though the numbers suggest it's very unlikely. Analysts estimate 18 to 20 million copies of Rockstar GTA 5 will be sold worldwide by the end of March of 2014. It's possible that someone who plays the game, will later go on to carry out a horrible shooting. Should that happen, it will almost certainly occur in America, which boasts far and away the highest number of mass shootings and shootings in general, while boasting no higher rate of video game consumption. If and when this hypothetical shooting happens, and really it's just a matter of when at this point, it will be terrifying and terribly sad, but it will pale in comparison to the reality of gun deaths in America. Each day in this country, on average, 30 people are murdered with a gun, 162 more are injured, and 53 use guns to commit suicide, according to the CDC. In 2010, the United States firearms were used to carry out 11,422 homicides and 19,392 suicides. But overall, violent crimes in the U.S. indeed lost my place. I was trying to change the place. But overall, the violent crimes in the U.S. indeed, as violent video games have become more popular, violent crimes has fallen. Each of the shooters Fox and friends used to bulwark their cases for censorship played video games, but so do millions upon millions of other people every day. Games are a $70 billion industry, and violent games consistently top sales charts. If there is truly a direct causal link between games like Grand Theft Auto 5 and violent shootings, we will soon have 18 to 20 million killers on our hands, not to mention the countless million more who have been playing violent video games for years. In an article remarkable for odd congruence of measured tone and hyper. The New Yorker's Simon Parkin argues that the go-to argument that video games are analogous, in, analogous to innocuous playground games of cops and robbers grows weaker as verisimilitude increases. In other words, as games become more and more realistic, developers need to be more careful about their content. Grand Theft Auto 5 can be viewed as torture simulator or strip club simulator, depending on which moment of the game you focus on. Parkin mentions a forum poster who hoped rape would be included in the game. It isn't, and images of a future of games filled with such simulation. In a hypothetical motion-controlled video game version of Lolita, it would be possible to inhabit the body as well as the mind of Humbert Parkin writes. A virtual sex crime might elicit a very different response if, instead of pressing a button to instigate it, you were required to mimic its pelvic thrust and parries, even if, as Nabokov's work, it was included to illustrate and eliminate to titillate, not titillate. We always worry about the decadence of our children, the dilapidation of our future, society, the immoral nature of people who engage in activities we don't quite understand. There will always be people who get great calamitous moral failures just around every corner. Sometimes they're right. More often, I suspect they're simple, uncomfortable with the changing world. After all, we have desire to explain why bad things happen, and often we blame and evoke fear in order to do that. When it comes to video games, the loudest voices are very rarely gamers. Like film, censors don't watch the film, or books censors who don't read. This creates a hollow sort of analysis. Grand Theft Auto 5 does have morally reprehensible characters, but the vast majority of the people who play this sort of game, hopefully the adults who play it and not impressionable children, see the experience as one of virtual, temporary, and entirely fantastical debauchery. We can drive through stoplights, mow over civilians, crash and die and start over again, get in ridiculous gunfights and still walk away on 2 feet, or even just go shopping, or play golf, or hunt. We are given a vast canvas of possibilities, the freedom to pretend to break bad and in a cartoonish, outlandish alternative reality. Most people can see that for what it is, escapism. Then again, gamers are all too often do the heavy lifting when it comes to painting the demographic in broad, ugly strokes. Game critics and developers have received death threats in the past for changing a game or panning it in a review. There is a small but vocal minority of gamers who do their level best to undermine the rest. Not everyone can draw lines between fiction and reality. These are those who almost certainly are influenced by violent media to act out violently. The Aurora shooter had been obsessed with the Joker from Dark Knight film. Would he have carried out his crimes without that film? Who knows? Probably. Even with tighter gun laws, it seems like he would have attempted a mass killing. His apartment was rigged with explosives. But the horrible actions of the few is not cause for censorship, and too often the censors really only want to clamp down on other people's entertainment, not their own. No, these shootings point us to the elephant in the room, the other big common theme across all the mass murderers: untreated mental illness. If there is truly a culprit here, it's the society which allows so many of its mentally ill to fall between the cracks. It is the ease with which potential violent, obsessively disturbed young men gain access to firearms. If it were as simple as saying violent video games kill people, then we'd all be in trouble. It's a silly fallacy, of course. Homicidal maniacs kill people. Homicidal maniacs play video games. Therefore, video games cause homicidal maniacs to kill people. If it were true, millions of neighbors, kids, and co-workers would be violent killers. So far as I can tell, this is not the case. None of which is to say that violence in games doesn't matter, or that violence in games or any other media should be protected from analysis or critique. Gamers are rightfully fearful of censorship, but they too often mistake criticism for censorship, and that can make honest, amicable discourse on the topic difficult. I believe strongly that the media we consume can and does impact our lives in other more subtle ways. You are what you eat, and an adage that applies equally well to the images and experiences we code into our brains. It may not make us killers, but I find it hard to believe we are simply immune to the things that we do on a daily basis. Games like Special Ops, the line, attempt to critique the violence and make us think about it critically. And even if we don't agree with the conclusion, at least developers and writers are attempting to have a conversation on their own turf rather than on Fox and Friends. Criticism and call for censorship are two very different beasts. Video games are an easy scapegoat for reactionary media and reactionary politicians, but that doesn't mean we should sit back and take an equally partisan biased view of the ways our media might affect us. Parents have a huge responsibility to understand and, yes, censor the media their children consume. Adult gamers have a similar responsibility toward their own cultivation of ideas and influences. Thankfully, the U.S. Supreme Court has made it very clear that the government has no such responsibility in limiting the speech of American citizens.